welcome back to another video. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, and while you're down there, hit the like button and comment what you did today. Tell me everything you did from the moment you woke up, and make sure brushing your teeth is one of the first things that you did. Now we are about to watch The Boy Who Hacked NASA: The Tragic Life of Jonathan James. Let's go. The video makes references to topics such as SUI. I couldn't even read the rest.
An interest, an addiction, an obsession with the computer and the internet is nowadays quite prevalent.
Produced by TWS Channel.
However, about half a century ago, computers were still a luxury, and individuals with technical knowledge about computers were few and far between. It was in 1971 when the microcomputer revolution was sparked by the commercial release of the Intel 4004 microprocessor, which made computers easier and cheaper to manufacture, thereby increasing its affordability. And in about a decade or so, in the early 1980s, around 8% of households were reported to have a computer in their personal possession. When you consider the fact that in 2016, 89% of households were reported to own at least one computer of some sort, 8% may seem small. However, it was still a considerable amount at the time. It was also in the 1980s when the story of Jonathan James begins. He was the first minor to be sentenced to a juvenile detention center for cybercrime in the United States. This is the story of how a young boy's obsession with the computer eventually tore his life apart.
This is about to be crazy.
The tragic life of the late, young Jonathan James.
They say he got life in prison? Or he just got sentenced? Let me pay attention. Wonderkind. 1982.
It was the year 1982 when Robert James and his wife Joanne Jurista settled into Miami-Dade County, Florida. About a year later, on December 12th of 1983, Joanne gave birth to their first child, Jonathan Joseph James, and together they settled into a small ranch-style home where the village of Pinecrest is located today. His father, who was now a computer programmer at Miami-Dade County, had a small work machine set up at home, which at the very young age of 6, Jonathan would take a consuming interest in, playing games for hours and hours on end all through the night, which is nothing strange or new, especially in this day and age, but back then it wasn't something that was common. In fact, this was at a time before studies into computer and internet addiction had even begun. His parents, growing increasingly worried about his health and education, watching their son's addiction interfering with his daily life, tried to impose parental controls. But this would only serve as a challenge to Jonathan, something he needed to bypass, and so he did, repeatedly finding ways around these restrictions that his parents would place on the computer. His interests only grew after this, as he progressed from being interested in just games to learning the ins and outs of how the computer worked. Eventually, he'd even become well-versed with the C programming language.
Okay.
In an interview, Robert James would recollect that he had once come home to find that his son had completely stripped the Windows operating system from the computer and replaced it with Linux.
Yeah.
Jonathan was curious and wanted to understand how this operating system worked. It goes without saying that for his age, Jonathan was impressive in terms of the knowledge he was exhibiting, especially considering the fact that this was at a time when computers weren't as easy to learn as they are now, and when learning resources weren't readily available at people's fingertips. The internet was still brand new. The World Wide Web was only introduced in 1990. Browsers were primitive and hard to actually navigate around and find information in. The browser Mosaic, later known as Netscape, which popularized the World Wide Web, or WWW, was only introduced in 1993. And was the first browser to integrate text and graphics into a single web page. There were a significantly low amount of users surfing the web and even fewer contributing to it, compared to now where 66%, over half the global population, has regular access to the internet with the touch of a button. Around the time that this happened, the internet had only about 20 million registered users. At around the age of 13, Jonathan's parents, who were now convinced something had to be done about his addiction, decided to confiscate his computer, and in response, he would run away from home, demanding his computer back for his return. But with the help of police, Jonathan was eventually found hiding at a nearby Borders Books. He argued that his addiction didn't hinder his grades and that this was evident as he performed quite well in school. A fact that was not revealed at the time, however, was that Jonathan had the power to alter his grades, as he had access to the Miami-Dade County school system.
Ooh.
Most of Jonathan's hacks can be traced to the time period between June and October of 1999. Among these intrusions was hacking into one of the largest telecommunication companies in the United States at the time, BellSouth Telecommunications. Despite the fact that this was a major crime, it was found that he never actually destroyed or damaged data. Neither was he guilty of exfiltrating or sending information outside of the organization, at least as far as the company and the media knew about. What may be surprising is that despite the fact that BellSouth Telecommunications was a large enterprise, presumably having the necessary security controls, didn't even realize that Jonathan had been in their systems. It was found out when he actually confessed to it later on, but only when he was faced with much more harsher charges, as this was nothing compared to the severity of his actions that made him, a teenager who wasn't older than 15 or 16, a crucial target of law enforcement.
So did his parents give him the computer back? Because based off how this story is progressing, it seems like he came in contact with computers again, or it would have ended there. Like the boy ran away over the computer. He's changing his grades. He's hacking into all these systems. These places need to start identifying these young, talented individuals and hiring them. Stop making them go to college and do all that stuff. He obviously has a passion for it. Hi, this young man. He's hacking into y'all systems and you ain't even know until he told you the truth. Years later, he could have wipe these whole companies out. This better get juicier. Come on. Conviction and convictions. Had that conviction to him. And he got convicted.
Jonathan had an online alias, Comrade, spelled with a zero instead of an O. And Comrade would go on sort of a hacking spree, gaining access into some of the most crucial government systems in the United States. The DTRA, or the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, the agency responsible to monitor and respond to any threat faced by the US, and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, which you'd probably know as NASA. Now, he didn't directly hack these agencies, or seemingly he didn't intend to. In June of 1999, when Jonathan was looking around for servers to compromise, he found a vulnerable server in Huntsville, Alabama, in which he planted malware that allowed him to, essentially, take control of 13 other computers in the system. It turned out that he had just hacked into the Marshall Space Flight Center located in Huntsville, a unit which actively worked on developing and testing rocket engines, as well as building and maintaining the communications of the International Space Station. He then proceeded to steal what was estimated to be worth around $1.7 million worth of data. It was later revealed by a spokesperson at NASA that part of this loot was the source code of a software used to control the temperature and humidity of the living space in the International Space Station, described to be critical life-sustaining elements.
Oh, hell no.
When NASA finally noticed the breach, they had to shut down their systems for 21 days, which directly resulted in $41,000 worth of damages in, quote, contractor labor and computer equipment replacement cost. This put Jonathan on the map, as NASA began to work with the FBI by providing them information about the breach.
Oh my gosh.
Meanwhile, Jonathan, unaware that the law was catching up to him and increasingly growing confident with his skills, found another server in Dulles, Virginia. This time, he installed a backdoor onto the server. This is usually maliciously planted as a secret entry point into a system. With this, Jonathan remotely connected to the server. Once he gained access, he installed a sniffer to capture the network traffic, which would pick up information such as login credentials and other sensitive data. This time, it turned out that the data belonged to a unit of the US Department of Defense, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, from which he downloaded thousands of messages belonging to Pentagon employees, acquired 19 usernames and passwords, as well as a portion of it belonging to military computers.
Why the government so easy to hack? How he hacked into two government entities? How he just hacking into them like it's nothing? He said he was searching for vulnerable servers, meaning the servers were not being properly protected with proper security controls. And it just so happened two of the servers that he found were owned by the government. The government, a child is hacking the government. What are these officials that work there doing? What are these software engineers and security ISOs and information security analysts and SOCs and all these people doing that a child, and there's no internet, or there is internet, but not in the way that we have it today, where he can just go on YouTube or go on the dark web, go on Reddit, and find a way to hack in, or they give him some source code and he just bloop, blop, bleep, bleep, plug everything in, and he's able to hack these servers. How is everything that vulnerable, especially in our government? This is,
It was the
come on,
first
Jonathan.
time that a subsidiary of the Pentagon had been hacked, and so this wouldn't go unnoticed.
I know he's going to jail.
On the 26th of January 2000, at about 6 in the morning, with a signed warrant, agents from the Department of Defense, equipped with guns and bulletproof vests, raided the young hacker's home, seizing any access he had to a computer or the internet. This included 4 PCs, a laptop, and a pocket computer. He was apprehended and tried in court shortly after, where he pled guilty to 2 counts of juvenile delinquency, one for hacking and stealing data from the Department of Defense, and the other for NASA. The case was made difficult due to Jonathan's age, 16 at the time of the verdict, and no other minor had ever been convicted for a cybercrime before, and definitely not for a crime of this magnitude. He was initially given 6 months in prison and probation until he turned 18. This decision was later reversed by the same judge, who would then go on to provide a very lenient sentence: 6 months of house arrest and a ban on computers for any reason other than his studies. Additionally, he had to write a letter of apology to both NASA and the Department of Defense, as well as work with them to show exactly how he'd gained access into these systems. If tried as an adult, Jonathan would have been charged with computer abuse and wiretapping, a crime that would have severe consequences, legal experts claiming it to be carrying over a 10-year sentence.
Damn.
Jonathan would later be found violating the terms of his sentence when he was found and apprehended on the streets.
Bruh.
This time, his blood sample showed traces of drugs.
Ooh.
The law didn't look too kindly on this. For the first time in history, a minor was sent to a juvenile detention center for cybercrime-related charges, flown to the Alabama Correctional Facility where he spent 6 months, his full sentence. This would gain attention in the press, and soon Jonathan would become an example to other minors who would now have to think twice before engaging in any sort of cybercrime.
Okay.
Prosecuting attorney Guy Lewis would state that this case would be proof that the Justice Department was willing to get tough with juvenile offenders charged with cybercrime. He said, quote, "This case should send a clear message to our community that, given the appropriate case, we will aggressively prosecute to the full extent of the law." It's quite safe to
How? He got 6 months, and you talk about he's prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law when he got 6 months? That don't even make no sense. They saying he stole $1.7 million worth of source code that's used to regulate the temperatures within an aircraft, the inside where people's lives are on the line. And y'all gave him 6 months, and y'all want this to be the example of what's going to happen to other teen hackers and cyber criminals. 6 months? That's it? Come on. He could have did whatever he wanted with those systems. People could have died. He cost NASA directly $41,000, and y'all give him 6 months? That's the fullest extent of the law? That ain't scary.
say that the
Come on.
6-month sentence in juvie struck a chord with the young teen.
Wow.
Previously, just the thought of it was enough to put aside this daring hobby. Never again. It's not worth it, because all of it was for fun and games, and they're putting me in jail for it. I don't want that to happen again. I can find other stuff for fun.
Facts. You probably should before you end up back in prison. C'est la vie. It's the life. Quelle vie? Dis-moi, quelle vie? Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé? Ouais, je peux parler français aussi.
After his release, Jonathan kept a low profile,
Good.
deciding to live what seemed to be nothing more than an ordinary life. As he didn't partake in talking too much to the press, neither was there any sign that he was back to his old mischiefs. His father would later tell the press that after Jonathan returned from prison, he suffered from depression and seemed to be often anxious, worried that he might be under constant surveillance. On top of this, tragically, his mother would pass away from breast cancer when he was only 18,
Oh.
leaving behind a home for Jonathan and his brother to live together in. Several years would pass without much news about Jonathan. However, in January of 2007, the Secret Service would begin investigating the TJX hack, where millions of customers of the TJX department stores fell victim to a hack aimed at extracting their information. This included personal details such as addresses of the customers as well as their payment information stored on the website. Later, it was found that this crime was spearheaded by the now incarcerated Albert Gonzalez, who at the time, 28 years old, became a multimillionaire due to the hack.
Stupid.
Along with Gonzalez, multiple other names of co-conspirators popped up in relation to the hack. Christopher Scott, Damon Patrick Toey, Maxim Yastrzemski, and the others who weren't yet identified, a JJ and JW. The individual referred to as JJ was mainly tied to the Office Max hack in 2004, which he was said to have worked on with Christopher Scott, where they parked outside an Office Max connected to the store's Wi-Fi network and sniffed out credit cards that were swiped, the associated PIN numbers and the account numbers. Christopher Scott was a friend of Jonathan. Unsurprisingly, this led to the theory that JJ was actually Jonathan James. Jonathan, of course, denied any involvement in the hacks. However, the police would raid his house soon after, along with the houses of his siblings. The agents never found anything incriminating or any connection between Jonathan and the retail hacks. But they did find a licensed firearm at his home, along with a suicide note that he had written previously.
So nothing
Less
happened?
than 2 weeks later, Jonathan James would be found at home, lying in the shower with a gunshot wound to his head.
Oh!
The same gun that was found in the raid but not seized by the police. And alongside him, a suicide note. Most of the note has been redacted, but here's what's been publicized reads. When I saw the names in the subpoena, I googled sequel. And now that one Albert Gonzalez has been arrested in connection to TJX, a company based in Boston, it soon became clear he was trying to pin it on Chris. When I googled Cumber Johnny, what I saw blew my mind. Albert had been working with the Feds since 2003. That means that for 5 years he had been having people like Chris hack credit cards for him while he makes money selling them over the internet. And then at the same time, he has his bias arrested to please the Feds. When this finally backfired on him, he gave them his ace in the hole, Chris, and got off with 1 count of wire fraud. Talk about entrapment. The Feds, of course, would see me as a much more appealing target than Chris. If they could tie me to this case, I'd be like Mitnick times 10 to them. Now, I honestly had nothing to do with TJX. Unfortunately, I don't picture the Feds caring all too much. Read Agent Steel guides to getting busted. The Feds play dirty. Chris called me the other day. He was in jail and they let him out. That can only mean that he too is trying to pin this on me. So, despite the fact that he and Albert are the most destructive, dangerous hackers the Feds have ever caught, they let them off easy because I'm a juicier target that would please the public more than 2 random fucks. C'est la vie. I have no faith in the justice system. Perhaps my actions today and this letter will send a strong message to the public. Either way, I have lost control over this situation, and this is my only way to regain control. Remember, it's not whether you win or lose, it's whether I win or lose. So sitting in jail for 20, 10, or even 5 years for a crime I didn't commit is not me winning. I die free. Incidentally, you can probably see the screenshots. They took an old suicide note of mine from 5 or 6 years ago but left me with my gun. Following this, he wrote down his will and testament, provided his router and VPN passwords along with the passwords to his MySpace and PayPal account, all of which has been redacted. I have the Beatles full on the hill in my head. I kept a journal in a safe place. Read it with a grain of salt. I usually only wrote when I was depressed, and I tried not to incriminate anyone. More than for salvation, my soul is dead. So I will look after the flesh. I am the master of this computer. For me, the gates will open. The name JJ would later be connected to a Jim Jones, an alias that was used by Stephen Watt, who was also convicted for selling a packet sniffer program which he made for Albert Gonzalez. However,
What? So he took himself out for nothing?
Robert James did believe that JJ was his son, but stated that even if he did partake in the Office Max hack in 2004, he didn't have anything to show for it, no real signs of having any wealth. There's very little evidence online to point to whether Jonathan was guilty or not. It seems a large part of those who do speak of the young hacker online seem to be on his side and agree that the law was too harsh on him. There are even theories that seem to point towards the idea that this was actually covered up by the Secret Service as a suicide, when he was actually murdered due to secrets he came to acquire from NASA and the Department of Defense. Conspiracies aside, I'm really on the fence when it comes to his initial conviction. On one hand, he was a minor. Putting someone who is 16 or 17 in prison, juvenile or not, without a doubt affects an individual's future in significant ways. Their professional lives, the way others look at them.
Nah, you wrong, bruh. If he did something he wasn't supposed to do. Now, you're saying that 16-year-olds should not get in trouble for what they do. If that's what you're saying, you're totally off. He was wrong and he was stealing government secrets, and they let him off easy. 6 months in juvenile. They didn't put him in a big boy prison with the booty tickets. They put him in child prison. Of course, it still has its impact, but then again, he should not have been hacking all that stuff and copying data. If he just hacked in and hacked out, if he didn't create a back door, which means he always has access whenever he wants, he could just boop, 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 sign in and get access. If he did, because backdoors are used by people when they want to have continuous access. It's not like a one-time thing, right? So he was creating this type of access so that he can keep going in and out, in and out, in and out. If he had did it once and said, oh, I stumbled upon it, I was searching, oh, my bad, I'm sorry, I didn't copy any data, any of that stuff, I understand. Let him off light. But he copied source code that controlled people's lives. So he has to face some type of consequence. And he's saying they could have pinned it on him. Brother, this is why you hire a lawyer. The lawyer gonna fight for you. So this guy, unfortunately, he took himself out. And this commentator, I don't know where he's about to go, but we're not going to let him finish. But this young man took himself out. He was obviously very smart and educated. And I wonder where he would be right now in a security frenzy where every company needs somebody that has knowledge and security principles, coding, Linux, all that type of good stuff. This man would have been making a fortune. He would be a CEO at this point. He might even be a tech gee-whiz, a tech billionaire at this point. But unfortunately, he took himself out. You may have some type of speculation about who did it, why it happened, if he actually took himself out, or the details of it. But I'm not going to do any type of speculative or have any theories and be a conspiracy theorist as to what happened to him. I think it's unfortunate, but guys, let me know down below in the comments your thoughts. Have you ever heard of this story? Have you read up on it? Let me know what you think about Mr. Jonathan James' story. I'm out of here. Make sure you subscribe, like, and comment. Peace.